Chapter 10, Style and Delivery. Body language is a very powerful tool. We had body language before we had speech, and apparently 80% of what you understand in a conversation is read through the body, not the words. Deborah Bull. So today we will talk about nonverbal communication and tone, body language, and then finally grooming and dressing. Public speaking is a marriage between the left brain and the right brain, and you've heard me say that before, and I will say it again and again. Left brain is that arrangement, the logic, the analysis, and then you need the right brain, the creativity, the imagination, the performance aspect of it. So speech is the meeting place of the body and the language. Nonverbal communication encompasses all ways we communicate independent of the spoken word. So communication scholars study everything from haptics, that's a study of human touch, how humans utilize touch. Touch can indicate a lot about people, about relationships, about power dimensions. It's also contingent on culture. Proxemics is the study of how humans utilize space. Again, it's contingent on culture and communicates a lot about you as a person, how close you stand next to someone, how you claim your territory on your desk when you're sitting next to another person. And then finally, the visual cues that we give people, that we send. A memorable way to think about nonverbal communication is through tone. Tone is the emotional quality or character of human expression. In public speaking, tone references the feelings of the speaker as they are expressed in delivery. There are two main components to tone, emotional and symbolic. The emotional concerns the mood and the feelings. You communicate your feelings, your mood, through your tone. And symbolically, it concerns meaning because people then make sense of your message in part based on the feelings that you communicate, the mood that you're in, how you are communicating. That helps people to make sense out of what you are saying. So it's not just what you say, but how you say it. And you've heard that before too. So what do we know about body language? Gesture and body movement can help or hinder one's message. There are two main aspects, one, human voice, and two, body movement. Do you like the meme over here? So this is Liam Neeson. I don't know who you are, but if you misinterpret my nonverbal behavior again, then I will hunt you down and I will kill you. So if you haven't seen Taken 1 or 2, was it Taken again? I'm not sure. If you haven't seen that, then you may not get it. But if you have seen it, you know it, you get it. I think it's funny, but I'm kind of nerdy like that. Okay, human voice, vocalics. You want to pay attention to your voice as a public speaker. You want to practice speaking. Your volume, your voice needs to hit the back of the wall if you're in a traditional classroom or even if you're in a room in your house, or if you're in an auditorium, your volume needs to fit the occasion, the audience, the room size, all of that. You need to vary your pitch. If you were talking about something that you were excited about, your pitch might increase a little bit. If you were talking about something that is really important and you need to focus on, your pitch might decrease a little bit. It might get a little bit heavier. So you want to pay attention to your pitch, your articulation, your speech sounds. You want to articulate to the best of your ability. That's why your rate of speech is important. If you're talking really, really quickly, it's tough to articulate all of your speech sounds. So you want to make sure that you pronounce your words properly and you articulate your speech sounds properly. And when in doubt, you can go to dictionary.com online, and if there's a word that you don't know how to pronounce or articulate, then you can look that up online and it can definitely help you. And then modulation is just, you want to modulate your voice. You don't want to speak in just one tone. If I talk in one tone all the time, no one will be able to discern how I'm feeling, and this would be really boring to listen to. Now, I'm not saying that this isn't boring for you to listen to, but what I am saying is that my tone should communicate to you anyway that I like this stuff, I'm interested in this stuff, and I want you to be interested in this stuff too because I think it's important and it matters. With regards to body movement, as a public speaker, pay attention to your gestures. You want to make sure that your gestures complement, accent, they can regulate the verbal message. So you are using your hands, you can practice using your hands, and for some people it's just natural, but if it isn't natural for you, do practice incorporating gestures into your speech. Facial expression is important. It communicates a lot about you. The RBF, your resting bitch face, which is really in communication terms called your at-rest face. Be mindful of what your at-rest face communicates to other people. Make sure that your facial expression indicates the mood that you want your audience to feel. And then finally, eye contact is very important, especially in this culture, and it needs to be direct with your audience. Do not look above their heads. It needs to be frequent, and it needs to be encompassing. So you're not looking down at your notes, you're not looking down at the floor, you're not looking up at the ceiling, you're not looking above their heads, because it's really, really awkward when you do that. You want to make direct eye contact with your audience, frequent and encompassing. So I've included high and low context cultures, and this is useful information for you. And some of you may have covered it in other courses if you've taken another course in business, in culture, in communication and culture. You might have already accessed some of this information before or learned about some of this aspect of culture before, but I do want to go over it because it is important. And I will briefly summarize it for you. As a public speaker, you need to understand that every culture has a context for communication. There's higher level context cultures and lower level context cultures. And what it refers to is the level of abstraction of the communication. So if it's a higher level of abstraction, that particular culture is going to focus more on less direct communication and on the nonverbals. They're much more sensitive to nonverbal communication, and they're much better at decoding and reading people's body language. That's higher context cultures. Lower context cultures, not so good at reading body language, but they focus more on the verbal aspect of communication. There's a much lower level of abstraction. That's why in North American culture, when I'm teaching a speech class, I will say to tell your audience what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you told them. And that's because you are learning this art in a low context culture. That is the expectation, that you are very clear with your communication, you're specific, you're detailed, and you're precise, and you're extremely organized. As a culture, lower context cultures, like I said before, they're poorer. They don't do as well at decoding or reading between the lines and reading the body language. Higher context cultures do better at that. So if you want to look over to the low context versus the high context, US is considered a low context culture, UK, Canada, Germany, Denmark, Norway, and then you can look at different aspects of the culture and what the expectation is, and it's just interesting to look at. The business outlook in a low context culture is much more competitive, and in a higher context culture, it's much more cooperative. In a higher context culture, people are much more collective than they are in a lower context culture, so they work together better, and they are more cooperative with each other as opposed to competing with each other necessarily. The work ethic in a low context culture is more task oriented, and in a high context culture more relationship oriented. So in higher context cultures, it's really important for people to get to know you. The work style of a low context culture is much more individualistic, and high context culture is much more team oriented, and that goes back to individualism versus collectivism. Employee desires for individual achievement in low context cultures, and team achievement for high context cultures. In relationships, more short-term relationships, they have more relationships in lower context cultures. They're a little bit more loose, and then in the higher context cultures, they have less relationships than do lower context cultures, but they're much tighter and much more long-term. So you can go through this. It's just really interesting to look at the differences in cultures And in communication, the preference in a low context culture is the verbal over nonverbal. That is why we have contracts. That is why we have a syllabus that indicates everything that you should or should not be doing. And if it didn't communicate everything, so if I said, okay, you have to have 4 speeches in this class. If you don't deliver 4 speeches in this class, then you will not pass the class. So if I didn't say that, or something like that, then you might say, well, hey, I can just give 2 speeches in the class, and it doesn't say it in the course syllabus, so it doesn't really matter. That would be an example. The reason why you might think that way is you might be from a low context culture versus a higher context culture where it would just be implied that there are 4 speeches and you have to give all 4 speeches. So it's just interesting to look at this, and how you can use this in your own life is when you're interacting with people from other cultures. There's a lot of misunderstanding because we look at the world through our own cultural lens. And it's really important to be able to understand other cultures and look at it through perhaps their lens. And also understand that these are generalizations based on research. And within a particular culture, a high context culture may have many aspects that are more individualistic. So it does depend. So this is just general information, but it's always best if you are speaking to a group of people that are from another culture to do your own research, and when in doubt, ask. When in doubt, ask. It's always important to do that. But this is just some interesting some differences between the 2 cultures. I have worked on the side, I've done consulting. I worked with a gentleman and his son. They were from mainland China. And I was helping the son work on his statement of purpose because he wanted to get into an Ivy League school in the United States. And he had come to the United States from mainland China a few years ago. And it was very interesting because when he was writing his statement of purpose, it was very high context. It was not direct. There was a lot of humility. He essentially was saying in his letter that although I am not really the best person to be applying for this position because there are so many other people who are more qualified and better and intelligent than I am, I still would love the opportunity to be a part of this institution. He said something like that, not exactly. And I said, oh, no. You can't say that in a statement of purpose, not in the United States. That does not work. So in the United States, the expectation is that you be much more direct, much more clear. People want to hear about how you had to overcome some type of hardship and then how you came out on top. So it's referred to as the humble peacock. You need to have some humility, but you need to come out the peacock with humility, if that makes sense. So that's just an example of a person from a higher context culture having to learn how to adapt to living in a low context culture and the expectations for that culture. And then finally, grooming and dressing to speak. So there are 2 basic rules of grooming and dressing for public speaking. Be well groomed. I cannot stress that enough. Be well groomed. It indicates to your audience that you respect yourself and you respect them. So be well groomed, but don't be too flashy. So consider your audience and occasion and generally dress 1 step up from your audience. So you don't want to make your audience feel self-conscious because you are wearing Hugo Boss and they are not, but you do want to dress up at least 1 step from your audience so that you do gain some of their respect and they see you as being a more credible speaker. And yes, as the movie The Devil Wears Prada says, people do pay attention to your shoes. It is important to make sure that you are wearing shoes. I noticed that in the first speech, some of you were not wearing shoes. You should be wearing shoes. And even if you feel more comfortable without your shoes, you should try to simulate as real a public speaking scenario as possible. So wear your shoes and make sure that you pay attention to the type of shoes that you are wearing. We covered today nonverbal communication and tone, body language, and then finally grooming and dressing to speak. So consider taking a class in nonverbal communication because it is fascinating. There's so much to learn about nonverbal communication, and it will help you in your personal life, in your social life, and your professional life without a doubt.